No one
Stop!
expected
Step
a
away
simple
from the
school
bus
morning
now!
to
Driver,
turn
open
into
the
a
door!
mystery
Kids,
that would
stay
shock
calm!
an entire town and expose a past buried for years. It started with flashing lights, a stopped bus, and a woman whose face suddenly went pale the moment police stepped inside. Children fell silent as two officers slowly walked down the aisle, their eyes carefully scanning every seat, every corner, every detail. The driver watched them through the mirror, confused and tense, unsure why this normal route had suddenly become the center of an investigation. Karen stood near the front, arms crossed tightly, trying to appear confident. Only minutes earlier, she had loudly demanded the bus be stopped, claiming something felt wrong. But now, as the officers stepped closer, something inside her seemed to shift. Her voice faded, her eyes avoided theirs. One officer spoke gently, asking the driver a few routine questions. The other began checking the bus number, the route, and the records connected to it. At first, everything seemed like a simple verification. But then the officer paused, staring at something on his device longer than expected. A strange silence filled the bus. Karen noticed it too. The officer slowly looked up and glanced toward her, not in anger, not in suspicion, but in recognition. It was the kind of look someone gives when they suddenly remember something important. Something old, something connected. Karen's fingers tightened around her bag. The driver cleared his throat, asking if there was a problem. The officer didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked a quiet question that made no sense to anyone else on the bus. "Ma'am, have you ever taken this route before?" Karen froze. It was only for a second, but it was enough. The hesitation, the sudden change in her breathing, the way her eyes moved toward the back of the bus without thinking. The children didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel the tension growing thicker with every second. The officer then turned his screen slightly toward his partner. A faded photo appeared, old, blurry, a school bus from many years ago. And beside it, a younger version of Karen. The driver leaned forward slightly, trying to see better. Karen stepped back. Her voice came out low and unsteady as she asked why they were showing that picture. The officer finally spoke, calm but serious. "This bus number, it was involved in an incident years ago." The entire bus fell into silence. And Karen looked like she had just seen a ghost from her own past. Karen's face drained of color as she stared at the officer's screen. For a moment, she looked as if she might deny everything, laugh it off, or walk away. But her silence spoke louder than any explanation. Something in that old photo had clearly shaken her more than she expected. The officer gently lowered the device and spoke in a calm, steady voice. He explained that years ago, a report had been filed involving the same bus number, the same route, and a serious incident that had never been fully understood. It had remained open, unsolved, quietly sitting in old records. The driver listened carefully, confusion written across his face. He had only been driving this route for a few years. He had never heard of any incident. But the tension in the air told him this was not something small. Karen shifted her weight, trying to look composed, but her hands were trembling slightly now. One of the officers noticed and asked her a simple question. "Were you a student on this bus years ago?" She didn't answer right away. The children watched quietly, sensing they were hearing something important, something deeply personal. The officer didn't push her. He simply waited. And finally, Karen gave a slow nod. The bus felt even quieter. The officer continued, carefully. He said the old report mentioned a disturbance during a morning route many years back. A sudden stop, panic, a child crying, but the details had always been unclear. No one could explain what truly happened that day. Karen closed her eyes for a brief moment. The driver looked at her through the mirror again. He was starting to understand that this morning was not random. She hadn't just stopped the bus out of anger. Something about this bus had pulled her back. One of the children near the front whispered softly, asking another if Karen used to ride buses like them. No one answered, but the thought stayed in the air. The officer then asked another careful question. "Do you remember what happened that morning?" Karen's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Her eyes slowly moved down the aisle, stopping at the last row. It was as if she was seeing something that wasn't there anymore. Something from years ago, something she had tried to forget. The officer followed her gaze toward the back of the bus. Then he looked at the old photo again. There was one more figure in the picture. And suddenly, the investigation didn't just feel like history anymore. It felt unfinished. Karen kept staring toward the back row as if she could still see the past sitting there, frozen in time. The officer noticed the way her eyes focused on that exact spot and slowly walked down the aisle to look closer, as though the empty seats might still hold answers. The children shifted quietly, watching everything unfold. Even the smallest movement sounded loud in the heavy silence. The driver stayed still, his hands resting on the wheel, sensing that whatever had started years ago was somehow returning in this moment. The officer turned back toward Karen and spoke more gently this time. "Who was sitting back there that day?" Karen swallowed hard. Her voice was soft, almost unrecognizable from the loud, demanding tone she had used earlier. She said she used to sit near the middle when she was younger. But that day was different. That day, she remembered someone else moving to the back. The officer showed the photo again. The image was old and faded, but there was clearly another child near the last row. The face wasn't clear, but the shape, the posture, the position on the bus stood out. Karen nodded slowly, her eyes filling with emotion she was trying to hide. She whispered that she remembered a girl sitting back there. Quiet, always alone. No one spoke to her much. No one paid attention. But that morning, something happened that Karen never forgot. The officer listened closely. Karen explained that the bus had stopped suddenly that day, just like this morning. Everyone was confused. Some children had started laughing, thinking it was nothing serious. But she remembered turning around and seeing the girl in the back crying. Not loudly, just silently. The driver leaned forward slightly, listening. Karen said she never knew why the girl was crying. No one asked. No one helped. The bus eventually started moving again, and by the next day, the girl wasn't there anymore. Just gone. No one explained it. The officer exchanged a look with his partner. That detail clearly meant something important. One of the officers quietly mentioned that the old report said a student had been removed from the route shortly after that incident. But there were no clear records of what happened next. Karen's hands were shaking now. She admitted something she had never told anyone. She said that right before the bus stopped that day, she heard someone shouting from the back. Not loud enough for everyone to notice, but enough to make her turn around. And when she looked back, she saw something she never forgot. Karen took a slow breath, her eyes still fixed on the empty back row as if the past was playing out right in front of her again. The officers waited patiently. Even the children sensed this was no longer just a story. This was a memory finally rising to the surface. Her voice came out unsteady as she continued. She said that morning years ago felt normal at first. Kids were talking, laughing, passing notes, just like any other day. Then suddenly she heard a voice from the back. Not shouting in anger. More like a scared voice asking someone to stop. Karen turned around. At first, she couldn't understand what she was seeing. The bus had slowed, and there was movement near the last row. Two older students were standing close to the girl sitting there. The girl looked frightened, her hands gripping the seat tightly. Karen remembered feeling confused. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know what to do. Then the bus stopped suddenly. The noise, the confusion, the chatter from everyone else made the moment feel blurry. But one thing stayed clear in her memory. The girl in the back was crying, and no one went to help her. Not the driver, not the other students, not even Karen. The officers listened carefully, their expressions serious but calm. Karen said she was just a child at the time. She felt scared. She turned back around and tried to ignore it. And by the next day, the girl was gone. No announcement, no explanation. It was like she had never been there at all. The driver shifted slightly in his seat, clearly unsettled by what he was hearing. One officer quietly asked if Karen remembered the girl's name. Karen shook her head slowly. She said she had tried to remember many times over the years, but the name never came back. Only the face, only the tears. The officer then explained something that made the moment feel even heavier. The old report mentioned a complaint from a parent that same year. It spoke about a student who suddenly stopped coming to school after an incident on the bus. But the details were never fully written down. It was treated as a misunderstanding, then quietly forgotten. Karen lowered her head. She admitted something she had carried for years. That morning, when she stopped the bus today, it wasn't random. She came back because she recognized the route. And she thought she saw someone sitting in the last row again. The officer's expression shifted slightly when Karen said she thought she saw someone in the last row again. He slowly turned and looked toward the back of the bus, as if expecting to find something there. But the seats were empty, quiet, and completely still. Karen explained that when the bus first arrived that morning, she had been standing across the street. She wasn't planning to stop it. She wasn't even thinking about the past. But then she glanced through the window and saw a figure sitting alone in the last row. For a second, she felt like she was looking at the same girl from years ago. Same posture, same stillness, same feeling of someone sitting there unnoticed. That was the moment everything rushed back. The memories, the fear, the guilt she had carried silently for years. Without thinking, she stepped in front of the bus and forced it to stop. The children on board listened quietly, trying to understand what she meant. Some glanced back at the last row themselves, half expecting to see someone sitting there now. The officer spoke gently, asking if she was sure someone had been there. Karen nodded slowly, but her voice wasn't certain anymore. She said when the bus stopped and the doors opened, she couldn't see clearly. People started moving, and the moment passed. When she looked again, the seat was empty. That was when she called the police, unsure of what she had just seen, unsure if it was memory or reality. The driver spoke for the first time since she began explaining. He said there had been no one in the last row when he checked the bus earlier that morning. He always made sure every seat was clear before starting the route. That detail made Karen go quiet. One of the officers then said something important. The old report mentioned the girl used to sit in the last row every single day. Always alone, always quiet. Many students remembered seeing her, but very few remembered speaking to her. Karen's eyes filled again. She admitted that she had spent years wondering what happened to that girl. Wondering if she could have done something. If she could have spoken up. If she could have told someone what she saw that day. The officer looked down at his device again, scrolling through old notes, searching for something more. Then he stopped. There was a name, and it connected directly to this very route. The officer stared at the name on his screen for a few seconds before slowly reading it out loud. The moment the sound of it filled the bus, Karen's eyes widened. It was a name she hadn't heard in years, yet somehow it still felt painfully familiar. The children watched in silence as Karen covered her mouth, her breathing suddenly uneven. She whispered that she remembered now. The girl from the back row. The quiet one. The one no one talked to. That was her name. The officer nodded gently. He explained that according to the old report, the girl had stopped attending school shortly after that incident on the bus. Her family moved away soon after, and over time, the situation faded into the background. There had never been a full investigation, only fragments of concern that were never fully followed up. Karen lowered her head, her voice barely steady as she admitted she had carried that memory for years. She said she used to think about that morning often, wondering if she should have told someone, wondering if speaking up might have changed something. The driver listened quietly, feeling the weight of the moment settle across the bus. Even the children understood that this was not just about the past. It was about regret, about silence, about things left undone. The officer then continued. He said something else had been added to the file recently. A note. Just a few weeks ago. Karen looked up quickly. The note came from a school record transfer. Someone with the same name had contacted the district, asking about old transportation routes from years ago. Asking specifically about this bus number. Karen felt a chill run through her. She asked what that meant. The officer explained carefully. It seemed that the girl, now grown, had been trying to trace her past. She had been searching for records connected to her childhood. Searching for answers. Karen slowly turned and looked toward the back row again, her eyes filled with emotion. For years, she believed the girl had simply disappeared. But now it seemed she had been looking back too. Looking for the same moment. Looking for the same truth. The officer added one final detail. The request for those old records came from someone now living in this same town again. Very close to this exact route. And suddenly, the past didn't feel far away anymore. The bus felt completely still as the officer finished speaking. The idea that the girl from years ago was now back in the same town made everything feel strangely connected, as if the past had quietly returned to finally be understood. Karen stood frozen, trying to take it all in. For years, she had believed that mourning was just a painful memory she had to live with. Something she couldn't change, something she couldn't go back and fix. But now, hearing that the girl had been searching for answers too made her heart race with a mix of fear and hope. The officer explained that the request for old bus route information had come only weeks earlier. Someone had asked for details about stops, schedules, and records connected to that specific bus. At the time, it seemed like a simple inquiry. But now, standing here, it felt like part of something much bigger. Karen slowly sat down in one of the empty seats, her strength fading. She whispered that she had never forgotten that day. Not once. She remembered the fear in the girl's eyes. The silence on the bus. The way no one spoke up. Not even her. The driver looked back gently, understanding that this was more than just an investigation. It was about something left unfinished for years. One of the officers spoke in a calm voice. He said sometimes the past finds its way back when it's time for the truth to be faced. He wasn't accusing anyone. He was simply acknowledging what Karen had carried all this time. Karen nodded slowly. She admitted that when she thought she saw someone sitting in the last row earlier that morning, it felt too real to ignore. It was like the memory had come back to remind her. To make her stop. To make her look back. The children on the bus listened quietly. Even though they didn't fully understand the story, they could feel the emotion behind it. They could sense that something important had happened here long ago. The officer then said something that changed everything one last time. He told Karen that the person who requested those old records had left a contact number. Someone from the department had tried calling, but there had been no answer yet. Karen looked up slowly. For the first time in years, she felt like there might be a chance to finally understand what really happened that day. Maybe even a chance to say the words she never said back then. As the bus prepared to continue its route, Karen stood quietly near the door, staring one last time toward the empty last row. This time, it didn't feel like fear. It felt like the beginning of closure.
Welcome to Karen Universe, where we dive into every wild, quirky, and intriguing story out there. If you enjoyed don't forget to subscribe to Karen Universe, share with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments.